Tuesday on Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand, happy to be back for another day. Hope everybody's having a tremendous day out there today. Try not to get blown over by the wind. Went out to the bus stop with the kids this morning. I was like, forecast is like 45 today. It's already 30. It's going to be great. It was not great. It's windy. It's colder than I imagined. So be prepared for that. But still, 45 in January. We'll take it for now. Great show coming up. Marcus Fuller from the Star Tribune will join me here in just a little bit, talking Gophers men's basketball. Little St. Thomas thrown in at the end, too. Want to get to them more this season because they are having a very good year. But the Gophers, man, 3 wins in a row over 3 quality opponents, 2 ranked teams at the time, Michigan and Oregon. 1 at Iowa in between there. All of those quad 1 wins in the net rankings. Not that that means a ton to the Gophers right now. As Marcus will tell you, they're not a serious NCAA contender right now just because of all the, everything that happened before those 3 games. They didn't beat anybody of note in the non-conference season, started Big Ten play 0-6. All of which, though, made this 3-game winning streak all the more shocking. I wrote about that yesterday. It will be put to the test tonight against Michigan State. Always a very good program. Again, one of the best in college basketball this year. So Marcus and I will get into this upcoming game against Michigan State, what the Gophers have done lately to be better, and things of that nature. Gopher women's basketball thought towards the end of the show. First, though, what did I miss? I was going to use today as another example of Timberwolves fans not being satisfied with anything, not being satisfied with any level of success if it doesn't look the way they want it to. It's like, win, but don't win like that. That was kind of last night's game. They beat the Hawks, who were severely shorthanded, resting some guys, some banged up stuff going on with them. They play again today, so they kind of packed it in a little bit in this game. The Wolves took a big first half lead, then kind of had to hold on and beat Atlanta 100-92. But, if you win 130-86 or 100-92, still goes down as 1 win, 0 losses in the win column, which is the point I was going to make. I made that point last week after they beat a similarly shorthanded Dallas team last week. I was going to expand on that, say, guys, can't you ever be satisfied with a win? Can't you just say a win is a win? Then it turns out Chris Finch felt the same way. Here was Finchy after the game.
It's not, listen, we made it close. They didn't make it close. That was a totally unacceptable second half of basketball. If we're trying to be a team, we're trying to be and go where we're trying to go, that's not good enough. Sloppiness, turnovers, approach. Thought we played really well, to start the game. Collectively, there were some guys who struggled to make shots or whatever. But yeah, we do see it from time to time against shorthand teams. We come out here and, we bullshit. And, it starts with our top guys. We've been trying to play better basketball, and at times I thought over the last few weeks we have done that. Guys in the second half, I don't know if they thought it was going to be easy. And then all the old bad habits creep back in.
That was a compilation of answers to a few different questions, but it basically came right out of the gate, right out of the start of his news conference post-game. Not happy with what he saw coming out of the break. You almost never hear a coach say, they didn't get, it wasn't the other team, it was us. Like, usually they'll try to give the other team credit. They'll say, hey, look, they're all professionals too. They play hard. We weren't happy with our effort, but I don't want to take anything away from the Atlanta Hawks. Didn't hear that. I heard basically mad at his team, mad at his top players. Don't know who that means exactly, but it sure could mean Anthony Edwards did not have his best or most focused game. He does tend to coast in these situations. The point being, obviously, from Chris Finch, and he let his players know about it. This was not just communicated in the media. He gave it to them pretty good after the game from what it sounds like. Players talking about that in the locker room after the game, that they need to regroup, respond to it, that is something they generally do well. Mike Conley Jr. said that something they do well is respond to adversity, criticism, constructive criticism, a good tongue lashing from their head coach. Point being, though, they've won 3 in a row, but he's not satisfied with the level of consistency, with the quality of their play, and that will not stand when they play better opponents. Now, the catch-22, the Pandora's box, whatever cliche you want to use, is that the Wolves generally give a better effort, a more focused effort against better teams. That's been the case during their kind of mediocre seasons of past. I'm not talking about like bad. I'm talking about when they've wavered during the last 3 or 4 years. It's been because they could not focus as well against inferior opponents. They seemed to have put that to rest last season when, they went 56-26. They beat almost all of the teams they were supposed to beat and gave a reasonable effort, I felt like, most of the time. 2 years ago, that was absolutely a problem. You remember how they kept losing to all the worst teams in the West and East, cost them like 4 or 5 games in the standings. You looked at it at the end of the year, it's like, man, if they had just taken care of their business, they would have, instead of being, the worst possible seed and having to go play Denver and be the 8th seed to get, squeak through in the play-in, they could have been the 6 or the 5 or something like that and had a winnable first-round matchup. So seems like that problem is back this season, although it feels at least like they are winning most of those games, that they're finding a way to either pull away in the fourth quarter, get a big enough lead that they're kind of messing around doesn't cost them in the end. But clearly, their head coach and their fans too, they can see it. Like we're not blind. We can see it. There is evidence to support that they are not playing their best basketball. They're not playing their most focused basketball against these lesser opponents. And some of the angst yesterday too was 2 potential injuries. It seems like the Wolves came through Naz Reid going down and Nickeil Alexander-Walker going down relatively in good shape. Naz had a shoulder, but he came back in the game. He dove for a loose ball late, maybe banged up his wrist a little bit, but it seemed like he was fine after the game. There was no updates on him, so I think he's going to be okay. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker, they announced after the game that he had a contusion on his leg. That sounds better than anything else that it could have been. He was telling people he'll be all right after the game. We don't know his immediate status, but it seems like both of those players at least have avoided any sort of kind of long-term injury in any of those cases. So we'll see what their status is going forward. But some good news in that. And you know what? They won the game. They got to win. They got to keep winning. The West is unforgiving. The West is packed, as always. Bottom line is they got the win, and Chris Finch got to deliver a message in a victory. We'll see if it is heeded going forward. One guy I'm pretty sure would not help the situation, Jimmy Butler. We've had that here already. Took years off my life and Chris Hines' life when he was starting out as the Timberwolves beat writer, and I was starting out as the Timberwolves editor for a year or 3 back in the day. Jimmy Butler, of course, forced his way out of Minnesota. Not great stuff there. Wound up in Miami eventually. Guess what? Things are not great right now either. He has been suspended for the 3rd time, an indefinite suspension after he walked out of Heat practice on Monday. He wants to be traded before the deadline on February 6th. He has made that clear. He was back in the lineup for a couple days, but then they were going to replace him in the starting lineup, so he walked out of practice. I hope he storms back into practice and challenges them in a scrimmage like he did in Minnesota. That whole saga was just so bizarre, but Jimmy being Jimmy, general soreness, everything like that, he is not in a good place right now with the Heat, has decided that is all done. Wonder if they will move him or just shut him down for the year to prove a point, trade him in the offseason. However this turns out, I think Wolves fans, you can be glad that this is no longer your headache. Let's bring in Marcus Fuller from the Star Tribune. Marcus suddenly covering the hottest team in town. Mark, it covers Gopher men's basketball. Last time we talked, they were winless in the Big Ten. Like, the nicest thing we could say about them was that they have a good recruiting class coming in. I didn't know if they were going to win a Big Ten game this season, Marcus. And now they've won not just 3 in a row, but 3 really good wins, like Michigan, Iowa, Oregon, 2 ranked teams, a good win on the road, like 3 quad 1 wins. What is going on here? Please tell me.
Well, I would say that if you're the only one that thought they were going to go winless in the Big Ten, then you're going to be you'd be in shock for what just happened. But yes. I would say there's a lot of people that question how many Big Ten games they would win. I think the last time we talked, they still had quite a few left. I want to say 15 games left. So,
yes,
the schedule was going to get a little bit lighter. Before we got on the show here, you talked about, wow, it's not like they beat Northwestern or Nebraska or Rutgers. Well, guess what, though? Those teams were NCAA tournament teams recently. There's no such thing as the bottom of the Big Ten anymore, as far as, you can guaranteed wins. But you did see that this was probably the toughest schedule that they've had to start off since I can remember. So the last time we talked was, probably after the Wisconsin game. And at that point, every team that they had played, the first 5 games in the Big Ten were teams that were ranked at one point. Maybe not when they were playing them, but they were ranked at one point. I mean, when they played Wisconsin was not ranked, and they ended up getting to the top 15. So it was one of the toughest schedules that I've seen for the Gophers to start Big Ten play, definitely for Ben Johnson. And then you have a team that, they have Dawson Garcia, have Mike Mitchell, they have Parker Fox, who experienced Big Ten play before. But the core of the team, the majority of the players, had never played in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
When they played Michigan State to open Big Ten play, this is a classic Michigan State team, very physical, rebounds well, defends well. So they were in for a rude awakening. And, before that point, it's not like they were lighting the world on fire in non-conference. They had lost to North Texas. They lost to Wichita State, Wake Forest. So this is a team was trying to find its confidence, trying to figure out how to play together. Mike Mitchell was injured during non-conference play, and they're trying to, bring him back into the fold. And again, if you looked at the wins that they've had, 3 in a row, two of these are court storms. Now, yes. when you say court storms, you're thinking, oh, did they beat a top 5 team, maybe number 1 in the country, like we've seen in the past? No. But where this team was, just 0-6 in the Big Ten, to beat Michigan. Michigan was undefeated at that time in the Big Ten, and it was a ranked opponent, and it was a walk-off by Dawson Garcia hitting a shot from the logo. It doesn't get better than that. I've not seen a logo shot to win a game at Williams Arena against a ranked team since I've been covering them. And I think I looked it up. The last time that happened was when Ben Johnson was playing for the Gophers, back in the early 2000s. So that one I could see why, they definitely stormed the court. And it was really the student section. They've been coming out strong since after Christmas break. This last one they've had, I definitely think, it was probably more worthy of a court storm. Oregon is not a traditional Big Ten team, right? They're new to the Big Ten, but Oregon is a very good team, top 10 at one point. I do think that the way they won that game pretty much controlled it from start to finish. It was something that the Gophers had been fans have been waiting for a long time. Not an overtime buzzer beater from the logo win.
Right.
It was a convincing win against a team that definitely is going to make the NCAA tournament, definitely is talented enough to compete at the top of the Big Ten. And, they made a statement. And in between that, they beat Iowa for the first time in 10 years.
In Iowa, yes.
That's why this is, it seems a lot more legit now. If you were talking to me after Dawson's buzzer beater, it would have been one of the craziest finishes, most spectacular finishes that I've seen at home, but didn't necessarily say that, this team is competitive in the Big Ten consistently.
So who or what is it? Like they had their meeting after the Wisconsin game. I think they played better even in their next loss against Maryland, I watched some of that game. That game was fairly competitive. They didn't win, but you could see, okay, like they're not just going to wilt the rest of this season, but like, what is it? Is it just the overall excellence of Dawson Garcia? Is it winning one game and then gaining some belief like Ben Johnson likes to talk about? Is it some of these role players or, other more established guys like Parker Fox or these transfers? Like, how do you characterize what has been better about them as opposed to just it's definitely been better?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about 3 games, so that is a good sample size, but it's not a huge sample size. So you have to, like you were saying, you have to look back before the wins and see some of the improvement in losses. And, you go back a ways and you see the double overtime loss to Ohio State. And you think, oh, Ohio State's not ranked. They're not really projected to make the NCAA tournament right now. But Ohio State beat Kentucky. At the time, I think Kentucky was a top 5 team. Ohio State has a lot of talent. And that was the first time the Gophers felt like, oh, okay, we can win a Big Ten game. Before that, they were losing by an average of 18 points a game. So including at home, humbling losses to Purdue and Michigan State. So they played well enough to win, I believe, twice. They should have won that game twice, and it didn't happen. Yes. A lot of heartbreak, and then they take that into Wisconsin. And, first half of Wisconsin was a 1-point game, and this was not a ranked Wisconsin team, but they were playing well enough at that point to be ranked, and it was only a matter of time. Now, they ended up getting blown out by 20 points in that game, and I think that shocked them because they thought, hey, we were playing better basketball. What happened in that second half?
Yeah.
So, I was waiting the press conference. Ben Johnson never showed up.
Yeah.
He didn't show up for his radio show either because they were having a players-led meeting that lasted an hour. And, I was standing outside the locker room. Mike Grimm, Gophers radio analyst, he was sitting outside or standing outside the locker room too. And we were waiting for them to get done. And, they didn't think about us, our time. Of course not. They're thinking about what they can do to help themselves get better. And, ever since then, they've been playing better basketball. They held each other accountable. I feel like, you can have only seniors talk, but other players talked as well. And it was not, it was, primarily positive. I wasn't in the locker room, but Ben and I talked to Dawson Garcia and Femi Odukale afterward, and they said it was pretty positive. It was more just pointing out areas where they needed improvement. And they really don't want to share that with anybody else. They weren't very specific. But as we've seen since then, certain players have, hey, I need to look at myself and I need to do this. I need to do that. Certain players need to be better defensively. Certain players need to take care of the ball better. Dawson for sure has the world on his shoulders, and he can play Big Ten Player of the Year type of basketball, but he also has to play within the team. And, and that sometimes, he tries to just put Ben Johnson says it all the time, put the cape on and be Superman. And there's ways of him looking like Superman, when he's really dressed as Clark Kent. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
He's making spectacular plays without really carrying it for a complete, 20 minutes, 40 minutes. There's other guys that have been playing well, and Dawson Garcia is playing his best basketball. Defensively is an area where he's been amazing in some of these wins. And he's played some of the best big men in the Big Ten. Michigan had 2 7-footers that were given the rest of the conference fits, and he shut down one of them for most of the game. And the other guy, he did his thing. But I just think that, look at this Oregon game. I mean, their leading scorer and rebounder, Nate Biddle, he went scoreless. And part of that is Dawson, part of that's the team defensively, and he's also guarding point guard. So you can lean in a lot on Dawson's shoulders, but other guys have stepped up. Femi Odukale, I wrote a story about him growing up in St. Cloud and learning basketball, but he's from New York. They were kind of waiting to see the offensive side for him to come confidence-wise, and that showed up at Iowa. And he had his best game of the season, and they ended up beating Iowa. So I think there's a lot of different areas that this team has improved. I think the biggest test will be at Michigan State.
Yeah.
People will say, oh, this team is, possibly can really, really make some noise in the Big Ten. And I even if they don't win that game, I think being competitive and showing that they're better than the last game they played against Michigan State will go a long way.
What is then the ceiling now, the revised ceiling? How sustainable is not just the level of play, but winning? Like, all of a sudden you get 3 quad 1 wins, you're into the top 100 at least of the net, when you were pretty far out of that for a while because you had a bunch of bad losses and no good wins. Like what should be like what's a realistic like goal now that we've seen A, how they started the year, but B, now how they've played these last few games?
Yeah, I mean, you have to put it in perspective, right? I mean, if you look at the Big Ten, there's 18 teams. They're right now. I think they have maybe 10 teams projected to make the NCAA tournament. With the way they played in non-conference, where they didn't get any quality wins,
right?
It's going to be really hard for them to build a resume for the NCAA tournament. So you got to take that goal kind of out of there, even though they'll never give up on that, right?
Right.
You kind of you have to put something in front of you that's a little bit more realistic, a little bit more attainable right now. And I believe a 500 conference record is very attainable. I mean, right now, they're only a few games off. Michigan State on the road is going to be tough, but again, the schedule gets a little bit lighter, in the back end. When I say lighter, no team is easy. There's no guaranteed wins anymore. There is not. I mean, there used to be Minnesota. A lot of people think that they're a guaranteed win. I think that's part of the reason why some of these teams came in and
sure,
they were shocked by how they started off. So they're going to actually get other teams' best basketball, even ones that aren't ranked and are not NCAA tournament teams. But can they finish 500 or close to it? The way they've been playing right now, you would say for sure. But then you have to see what happens when the winning streak ends. And then can they just pick it back up again, especially when you're not playing Michigan State, a top 10 team on the road. Nobody expects you to win that game, but then you're playing, again, some of these teams that aren't ranked, that are kind of in the middle of the pack or below. Right now the Gophers are about 15th in the Big Ten. So, there are teams below them that all of a sudden those teams are the underdog, and those teams are wondering, okay, can we get out of the gutter? And dealing with success is different. Do I think that this team can make a postseason run? I think that getting into the Big Ten tournament should be the goal. Finishing 500 or close to it and getting to the Big Ten tournament. Because right now, this year, for the first time, the last two teams, the bottom 2 teams, are not eligible. Okay. And when they started off the season 0-6 in the Big Ten, they were the only winless team at that time, and they were 18th. And now they've moved themselves into the Big Ten tournament mix. And if you're the Gophers, you're Ben Johnson, you got to stay there. I mean, even if you don't finish 500 in the Big Ten, if you can get yourself into the Big Ten tournament, you never know what happens, and then try to get it into the postseason.
I mean, if this team winds up with even 8 Big Ten wins, that's 8 more than I thought they might get at a certain point. I mean, I'm honest. Like, I didn't think much of anything at all. Like, and for good reason. Some of it, no fault of their own. Like, they just lost so much from last year. Like, it was such a buzzkill when Hawkins leaves, Payne leaves. Like, they lose all these guys. Oh, Christie goes to the NBA. Like, that's understandable. But like, so much of what the hope was last year goes out the door, and then they don't have anything to dream about in the non-conference season. They start 0-6 in the Big Ten. Like, if they rebounded to get to 8 wins this year, that would be shocking to me. Even if they made the NIT, that would be shocking to me.
Yeah, I mean, the NIT isn't what it used to be. And again, you have 18 teams in the Big Ten. So technically, if they're 15th right now, right?
Yeah.
If you're 15th, you make the Big Ten tournament. But last year, there were only, there were 14 teams in the Big Ten. So technically, you're below last place last year. So you don't, if you're aiming,
they got a ways to go, is what you're saying. They got a ways to go.
Not necessarily. I mean, sometimes there's a 3, 4, 5-way tie, and one win can jump you up quite a bit. But you don't want to, you want to set your goals higher than finishing 15th where they are right now. And I think that they can get there if they keep playing the way they're playing right now. It might not beat Michigan State on the road or, a ranked opponent again. They won't have that many. I think the Big Ten right now, they played the toughest half of that schedule. So,
yes,
I think the best team they're going to see, down the road is probably UCLA and Wisconsin again.
Yeah, after Michigan State, yeah.
Right. So, and again, there's a lot more tests that this team has to go through. They have to go on the road for 2 games in LA and not come home. I mean, that's been brutal on some teams. Wisconsin, they've lost out there. Other teams have lost out there. USC is playing a little bit better. In UCLA at one point was projected to be a Big Ten title contender. So, and they have talent. They haven't been playing consistent, but they have talent. So I like the fact that there's still there's a little bit lighter last half of the schedule,
right?
But there's still some huge tests that we can say, hey, if they win some of these games, they might not finish 500. But even if they don't, like you said, this is a way different team than we saw to start off the Big Ten season. And then just going back to Dawson, I mean, he's having one of the most amazing seasons for a Gopher in a long time, especially one from Minnesota. And, everybody reminds me, that he gave up about $1 million to stay here.
Yeah.
And, he's still making something substantial here to stay. But at the same time, what he gave up and the way they started the season and how he was still able to stay positive and driven and the leader of this team, it says a lot about him and some of these other guys.
Yeah, it does. I'm still I'm flabbergasted. I'm going to watch them much differently than I did, at the start of the year. I just, we make assumptions about some teams, and then the play validates the assumptions, and now we need to recalibrate again because they're much more interesting now, probably to you and to me and to anybody else than they were 2 weeks ago. Yeah,
I mean, this team is always interesting to me because Ben Johnson, he's been around a long time as a player, assistant, head coach, and he gets a lot of heat from the outside, and
correct.
How he deals with a program that from the start, when he took over, lost 10 players, 11 players, and every year they've been hit by the portal. And now, with NIL and, somehow he still manages, like we're seeing right now, to win some games. It's a testament to him, but also his staff and what they have to deal with. But at the same time, that's today's landscape, college sports. And, every coach, whether you're a champion or, you've been struggling to compete in the conference, they have to deal with the same thing. And you're seeing some coaches that are Hall of Famers, like John Calipari, at Arkansas. He's got a heavy NIL budget, and he's got some of the top transfers in the country. And they just won their first game in conference after 6 losses recently, last week.
Yeah. Well, it should be interesting. It's an interesting year of local college hoops, too. St. Thomas has been interesting. I'm glad to go
very much so.
Joining their mix. And
you said at the beginning that the Gophers were the hottest team in Minnesota, and that's actually St. Thomas men.
Well, they're
6-1. They're 6-1.
But St. Thomas has lost at least more recently than the Gophers, I think, because didn't St. Thomas start like 4-0 or 5-0 in conference? So the Gophers have the longest winning streak. But you're right, St. Thomas has been red hot all year too. And
no. I'm not taking away anything. Not taking away anything of what the Gophers have done recently, and certainly Tommy's deserve a lot of respect for what they've done in the Summit League. By the way, it's not just non-conference, because you can string some wins together in non-conference, but they've been doing it in the Summit League. And one of these days, we're going to have a podcast about the Tommies playing the Gophers.
I hope so. When will we do that?
Yeah, exactly. Or why don't they? That'll be the next one.
Why don't they? Well, that's Royce's pet project. Tommies are on. They are or were on national TV soon, right? I think they play North Dakota State this week on national TV on CBS Sports Network.
They do.
Okay.
But
I'll be watching that too. In addition to these Gophers. What's
when
that?
they play the Gophers, that will be even more watched than a
see.
nationally televised
Yes.
Summit League game.
Agreed. All right, Marcus. Well, I appreciate the update, trying to explain this to me, and go cover that Michigan State game. We'll see what happens the rest of the year, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, appreciate it.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with Royal Credit Union's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
Really good stuff from Marcus. Agree that it would be great if the Gophers and St. Thomas would play each other in men's basketball at some point. At certain point, hopefully it'll become mutually beneficial. I get that maybe at this point it's not beneficial to the Gophers, but if St. Thomas keeps ascending, becomes a program that is, not going to hurt you if you lose, then I think for sure that should be a reality. It's been a Patrick Royce pet project for a while now. Fill up an arena, everything like that. That would be good stuff. So hoping for that somewhere down the road, but in the here and now, Gophers against Michigan State tonight in East Lansing. Chance to extend that winning streak, but it will not, of course, be easy. Let's finish with the cooler. Ken writes in, "Hi, Michael. Maybe I have missed coverage, but I think the Gopher women's basketball team deserves more attention. Good coach who has held the team together after coming in new last year with a good quality play, homegrown players, interesting personalities, ranked team. There is a lot to like. If only the coach could work with a full deck." He's citing injuries to Mara Braun and other key players for the Gophers. "They might have a tough time on the upcoming West Coast trip, but they are a fun team. I enjoy your articles and deliveries. Thanks, Ken." Good point, Ken. Probably time for me to talk a little bit more about them in the coming weeks. Their season heating up 18-3 right now, which is very impressive. 6-3 in the Big Ten after throttling Wisconsin a couple days ago. Like Ken mentioned, though, it will get challenging here in the next couple games. They have to play UCLA and USC. UCLA right now, the number one ranked team in all of women's basketball, 20-0 on the season. And oh, by the way, USC ranked fourth in college women's basketball, 18-1. So they got to play the number one and number four teams back to back. They play USC first on Thursday, UCLA on Sunday. Those will be tremendous tests for Don Plitzowite's squad. Not that there's always easy games in the Big Ten, but those certainly will be two of the hardest. We'll see how they come through both of those games. Again, number one and number four, you're not expecting wins necessarily. The Gophers, were ranked 23rd. They dropped out because they had a loss earlier last week. They're still very close to the top 25. They can compete. These will be good tests to see how they compete, not just against good teams, but the very best of college women's basketball. But thank you, Ken, for the shout out to Gopher women's basketball. And yes, we should be talking about them more in the coming weeks and months. That'll do it for me today. Thank you for joining me here on the Daily Delivery Podcast. Good show coming up tomorrow. Expecting to talk Twins with Bobby Nightingale Jr. from the Star Tribune. Kind of getting you up to speed, everything that was said late last week and into the weekend. Twins reassembling, getting their pieces together, getting all their groups together for the Twins Fest this past weekend. See where everything is headed with free agency, trades. Not much has happened so far. What might happen? Where are we at with the sale? Things like that. So Bobby will help unpack all of that on Wednesday's show. Till then, I'm Michael Rand, back at it again tomorrow.